New tonight, inside the investigation of a possible break in one of our area's biggest mysteries. What happened to Brian Shaffer?
A young medical student last seen going up this escalator to a popular campus area bar. But video never showed him leaving. Or did he?
Brian Shaffer walked into a crowded bar with cameras everywhere and then simply vanished. No footage of him leaving, no body, and a phone that mysteriously turned back on days later and started moving across the city. The scent trail led away from the bar. The pings pointed west, and the evidence now reveals a dark truth that was hiding in plain sight. This case isn't a disappearance. It's something far worse. Let's discover what the cameras didn't show. Brian was a medical student, a son who had just lost his mother.
Today marks 19 years since OSU medical student Brian Shaffer went missing. He was 27 years old at the time of his disappearance.
A boyfriend planning a trip to Florida and a young man thinking about his future. And yet his life appears to have ended in a 6-minute gap in a crowded college bar. Cameras were rolling, police officers were standing nearby, and dozens of people were around him. But when the night ended, he was gone. If this case is really finally solved, then why was he never seen again? If there were cameras everywhere, how did he disappear? And if someone made sure he was never found, how much planning did that really take? Brian Shaffer was 27 years old and a second-year medical student at Ohio State University, ranking among the top of his class. Outside of school, music was his emotional outlet, especially Pearl Jam, whose Stickman logo he had tattooed on his arm. He was also grieving. His mother, who he was very close to, had died just weeks before his disappearance. And that loss hit him hard both personally and emotionally. At the same time, he was in a serious relationship with fellow medical student Alexis Wagner, and the two were about to go on a long-planned trip to Florida for spring break, a trip that many believed he wanted to use to propose. So when he went out at the start of spring break with his friend Clint Florence on March 31st, 2006, nobody thought anything of it. They hopped through downtown Columbus, ended up at the Ugly Tuna Saloona, and at 1:55 in the morning, Brian was captured on surveillance with two women, casually talking near the escalator. That is the last confirmed image of him. He is never captured leaving the building. What most people don't realize is that the Ugly Tuna Saloona was not just a simple bar with one door and one camera. It was part of a larger multi-level complex with confusing foot traffic patterns and multiple access points hidden behind ordinary walls. The bar itself was located on the second floor. The main public entrance was an escalator that came up from the street level into a small landing area where people gathered, smoked, or talked before going inside. To the side, there was a small patio area that opened onto the exterior. Inside, beyond the main bar floor, there was also an emergency exit that led to a stairwell going down to the ground level near the front of the building. Then there was a service corridor that connected to a hallway containing an elevator and a separate stairwell. That hallway led to a construction zone at the time, because the South Campus Gateway complex was still being developed. From that construction zone, there were additional exits, including one that opened onto Pearl Alley, a quieter back area behind the building. Now, about the cameras, because this is where the illusion begins. People often hear, "There was surveillance footage," and imagine modern, high-definition, constantly recording security like we have today, but this was 2006, and the system inside the Ugly Tuna was a mixed, outdated setup. The escalator camera, the one that last captured Brian, was a stationary camera, mounted at an angle, and it only showed a narrow slice of the entrance area. This meant that while people believed that the exit was fully covered, it wasn't, and there were blind spots, moments when certain areas were not being recorded at all. Here is the first uncomfortable question. If cameras were so limited, was Brian's disappearance really mysterious? Or did people just overestimate how much those cameras actually saw? The answer is that they absolutely overestimated it, and that misunderstanding shaped this case for years. The critical window is just 6 minutes. At 1:55 a.m., Brian is seen talking to the two women near the escalator. At around 2:01 a.m., Clint Florence and Meredith Reed, who had been looking for him inside the bar, give up and leave. They are clearly captured on camera exiting, but Brian is not with them. By that time, Meredith had already tried calling Brian using Clint's phone, and his phone had gone straight to voicemail, suggesting it was already turned off or had lost signal. During those 6 minutes, Brian either walked back inside, walked somewhere outside the camera frame, or left through a route that nobody noticed. This is where the concept of silent exits becomes important. The emergency door and the service corridor were often used by people trying to step out for air, make a call, smoke, or avoid crowds. Alarms on these doors are supposed to sound when opened, but in many bars, especially on busy nights, those alarms are turned off because they constantly go off due to drunk customers. That means Brian could have pushed through one of those doors, stepped into the hallway or construction zone, and no one in the main bar area would have had any idea. Now, let's address the argument that he died inside the building. Some people believe he wandered into the construction area, got confused, fell into a pit, or became trapped behind temporary walls. But when you look at it practically, this theory falls apart. The building was not some massive unfinished skyscraper. It was a 2-story commercial complex with limited interior space. Police searched the area soon after he was reported missing. Even if a small section had been overlooked, maintenance workers, plumbers, or electricians would have eventually discovered something in the years that followed, and nothing has ever been found. Now, if the building was searched and nothing was found, and no remains have ever surfaced, is it more logical that Brian simply dissolved inside concrete, or that he got out unnoticed? The second option, while disturbing, makes far more sense. Another factor that weakens the died inside the building idea is his phone. A phone stuck under debris or sealed inside a wall would not suddenly start pinging cell towers days later, and then months later start ringing again. That kind of movement and intermittent activity suggests the phone, at least, left the building. So when people say he was never seen leaving, what they really mean is he was never seen leaving through the front entrance at a moment when a camera happened to be looking. Those are two very different things. Given the multiple exit points, the blind spots, the outdated camera system, and the natural chaos at bar closing time, it is entirely realistic that he used another route. And if he did, that means the mystery does not start inside the Ugly Tuna Saloona. It starts the moment he stepped outside it. So, most likely, the building probably didn't swallow Brian. It just lost sight of him. And if he didn't stay inside, if he really did make it out through one of those silent exits into the darker, quieter parts of the area, then the story doesn't get easier from here. It gets worse. Inside Brian's life. What you're about to hear is not a rumor, not a fan theory, and not a dramatic guess made for views. It's a recent analytical shift based on re-examining his life, his choices, and the gaps that never made sense before. And once you actually connect those pieces, the "he ran away" idea collapses almost instantly. Let's start with what was happening in his head, because this part often gets oversimplified or romanticized, and that's dangerous. Brian had just lost his mother, who he was extremely close to. Her death hit him in a way that changed his emotional baseline almost overnight. Plus, he was in medical school, which meant long nights, minimal sleep, constant pressure to keep up, and the feeling that one mistake could undo years of work. At the same time, he was in a serious relationship with Alexis Wagner, another medical student, and they had a spring break trip to Florida planned just days after his disappearance. People who intend to vanish do not usually make long-term shared plans with someone they love right before they disappear, because those plans create questions, expectations, and emotional anchors. And Brian was still clearly living inside those connections. Now, here comes the nuance most people ignore. Brian's grief made him inconsistent. There were reports that he told Alexis, at one point, that they should disappear together, run away, and start over somewhere. And then only days later, he told her to move on without him, saying he didn't know if he'd ever be okay again. Some people point to this and say, see, he wanted to vanish. But people in grief often say opposite things on different days because they're reacting to overwhelming emotion. That's proof of a mind under extreme pressure. His relationship with his father adds another layer. After his mother's death, there was growing tension over life insurance, over finances, and over his father's new romantic involvement. On top of that, his father had reportedly told him he would not continue paying for medical school. That kind of stress is not the perfect launching pad for a clean disappearance. It's the opposite. It ties you to reality harder, because now survival requires resources, and Brian did not have spare resources. Brian had around $25,000 in credit card debt. He did not withdraw large sums of cash or drain his accounts. There is no evidence he secured funds that would allow him to live off the grid, travel, rent housing, or build a new identity. He also never cashed a tuition check his father had given him shortly before he vanished. So, why would someone about to start a whole new life leave thousands of dollars sitting there untouched? Well, because he wasn't planning anything. Even more telling, he left behind all of his belongings, his clothes, his instruments, his personal items, and his entire daily life. His phone bill continued to be paid by his family for months because they were hoping he might call. Now, here's where people often try to defend the runaway theory by pointing to his history of going off the grid for short periods. Yes, Brian had a pattern of sometimes disappearing during nights out or going on impulsive short trips without telling everyone, but every single time he did that, he always came back. And if Brian really did successfully start a new life, why has there been no digital or financial trace of him in nearly 2 decades? In the modern world, vanishing completely is incredibly difficult. You need food, shelter, documents, medical care, employment, or at least some form of income. Even people who fake their deaths almost always leave some trace eventually. But Brian left nothing. So, if the runaway theory explains nothing about the phone pings, the scent trail, the 6-minute disappearance window, or the complete lack of later activity, then what are we left with? If Brian didn't stay in the bar, and he didn't build a secret life, we're left with what the evidence actually shows. And it leads to a place nobody wants to go. Scent, pings, and a likely crime. Search dogs don't guess or imagine. They follow chemistry. And what they followed that week after Brian Shaffer vanished led away from the ugly tuna, not back into it. The tracking team started at the rear of the South Campus Gateway building, where Brian was last believed to be near, and the dogs immediately pulled their handlers toward the south side, away from the main entrance and into Pearl Alley. They alerted behind the Wendy's parking area, a dimmer and less crowded space where signs of vomiting and urine were later noted, both consistent with someone who had been drinking heavily and stepped aside to get air or recover. From there, the scent trail continued along Pearl Alley in the direction of Brian's apartment, then gradually faded out. That pattern strongly supports the idea that Brian exited the building and started heading home, choosing a quieter back route instead of the crowded main entrance. It's important to ask, why would a strong scent trail exist outside if he never left the building? There's only one answer: because he did leave. And the second part is even harder to ignore. The path the dogs followed led specifically toward the area where Brian lived. The security footage supports this too. When he was last seen on camera, his posture and movements, while relaxed, were not sloppy. He had been drinking, yes, but he was still walking with balance and control. So the idea that he suddenly became completely incapacitated and fell somewhere inside the building doesn't match what we see. Now we have to look at the phone. By 2:01 a.m., when Meredith tried calling him from Clint's phone, Brian's phone had already gone straight to voicemail, which either means it was turned off, had lost power, or had no signal. That's within minutes of his last appearance on camera. But then, something strange happened. His phone began to register pings on cell towers, and those pings showed movement, mostly heading west across Columbus over time. There are only a few logical explanations for that movement. One possibility is that Brian himself turned the phone off initially, then turned it back on later, maybe to check messages or conserve battery. But if that were the case, why did he never answer a single call or contact anyone he loved? Another possibility is that a passerby found the phone somewhere, turned it on, maybe charged it, and carried it around without realizing or caring who it belonged to. But then you have to ask, why did that person never report finding it, and not continue using it either? Then there is the third and darkest possibility, that the person or people involved in Brian's disappearance kept the phone, turning it on and off, to avoid tracking or because they didn't know how modern tracking worked. In 2006, phone tracking by police was far less understood by the general public. But criminals often act in ways that reflect both awareness and misunderstanding. Someone might think, if I turn it off most of the time, they won't find me, without fully grasping how tower records work. That scenario fits disturbingly well with a pattern of brief connections, no calls, and then long periods of silence. And what matters most is this simple fact: the phone moved. And its movement pattern is very hard to reconcile with any theory that keeps Brian inside the Gateway building after 2 a.m. Now, let's quickly clear away the weakest explanations because they sound dramatic, but they fall apart under even basic scrutiny. The idea that he died by accident in the construction zone conflicts with multiple things: the searches that were done early on, the physical size of the building, and again, the phone movement. The drowning theory also struggles to survive reality. Brian was heading toward his apartment, not toward the Olentangy River, and even if he somehow wandered off course, a submerged phone would not continue pinging towers for weeks. The smiley face killer theory gets attention because it's eerie and linked to other cases of young men found in water. But there is no body, no graffiti, and no direct evidence tying this to Brian. Without those anchors, it becomes a parallel story rather than an explanation. Then there's the dumpster theory, which imagines that Brian passed out near or inside a dumpster and was accidentally taken with the trash. That's not impossible, especially around bars, but on its own, it still doesn't explain why his phone later activated and moved across the city, unless someone recovered the phone beforehand and kept it. And this leads us to the reconstruction that fits more pieces of evidence with fewer leaps. Brian exits the ugly tuna saloona through a less visible route, most likely a service corridor or construction-adjacent door that bypassed the escalator camera. He steps outside into a darker, quieter area behind the building. He begins walking along Pearl Alley toward his apartment, possibly because he wanted distance from Clint and Meredith or simply because it was a quicker and less crowded route. Near or behind Wendy's, he becomes vulnerable. He could have gotten sick, sat down, or paused to regain his balance. In that state, he becomes an easy target. At that point, two scenarios fit the evidence best. Either he accepts a ride from someone he vaguely knows or feels comfortable around, someone offering him help, or he is approached and forced into a vehicle by someone who saw an opportunity. In both cases, the result is the same. Brian leaves the area not on foot, but in a car. His phone goes with him. Whatever happens next happens elsewhere, away from cameras, away from crowds, away from easy discovery. His body and any physical evidence are deliberately concealed or disposed of. The phone is kept, occasionally powered on, perhaps moved, perhaps handled, producing the irregular pattern of pings without ever generating communication. Is this an official conclusion? No, and it needs to be said clearly that it is not. There has never been an arrest or a confirmed confession. But this is a forensic-style reconstruction that aligns with the scent trail, the phone activity, his last known movements, and the psychological and environmental context of that night far better than the idea that he fell into a hole or simply decided to start a new life. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Click the next video for more exciting content.